I think you're muted, Andrew.
This will fit nicely into some of the previous discussions as well, because most institutions, when they move from a learning-based outcome system to a competence-based outcome system, people kind of get this question, well, what exactly is the difference between a learning outcome and a competence? And so we produced a little Menti for you to have a go at first to see what some of your views are, and then they'll see if we have any alignment or disagreement. So if you can join the Menti code 14182402, please.
Cool. And sort of before we launch into this conversation, we thought it'd be useful to give a little primer on competence-based education and where it comes from, so that we're all sort of talking from the same place. So I think the competence-based education, I think I suppose one of the seminal pieces was that EU framework, which was sort of back in the early 2000s. And I think sort of trying to represent this shift, particularly from a very knowledge-focused higher education sector into into an action-focused higher education sector. So as with the changing idea of exactly what it is that universities do and universities achieve, I mean, I think there are three sort of core challenges associated with this. So first off was within modular degrees, and something that we sort of recognised for some time, is this difficulty for students and for staff for transferring knowledge and learning across different parts of the different parts of the curriculum. So from a sort of from a lecturer perspective, often a lecturer comes in, they know their module, they know what they deliver, they know their assessments, and I know it was very much the case for me when I started. I remember getting questions from students about other modules, and I thought, well, I don't know, I wouldn't even know where to begin to answer some of that. And then also this sort of more holistic perspective of moving beyond the discipline, but thinking about how the discipline and the mindset that engenders it interacts with student personal and professional futures. And then, as I say, this moving towards moving towards the degree as evidencing students capability to do something after they leave. And there are various different competence frameworks. I've sort of presented three here, but there are certainly more, and there is quite a few different ways of thinking about it. But I think particularly this broader way of thinking about outcomes as what students know, what they can do, or how they can apply that knowledge, or how they can apply that learning, and then the sort of more attributes around professionalism, or perhaps resilience, or confidence, or sort of attributes, or things that the student is, as opposed to what they do or what they know. And this is commonly conceptualized as knowing, doing, and being. And that sort of core part of competence is, in order to be competent, we have to have all three of those represented, and not just any one. So we're interested in people's perceptions from listening to this, people who have gone through. What do you guys think the difference between a learning outcome and a programme competency is? And then really, what does that mean for the curriculum? I suppose a place to start this is a contentious comment. I won't attribute it to any particular person, but we were having a conversation at a conference, and someone said, well, a programme competency is just a learning outcome done correctly. So if anyone has anything that they want to say to that, we've envisioned using Mentimeter for this just because of the number of people. Because we're trying to sort of manage the conversation, and we want everybody to have an opportunity to contribute. So hopefully that works. But yeah, so what is the difference between a learning outcome and a programme competency? So we'll give people a few minutes to articulate that. and then we'll use that to facilitate a conversation.
Yeah.
One already, so we can sort of start discussing that.
I like that one.
So I suppose that's interesting in the context of, is a graduate attribute not a learning outcome?
Or flipping that around, could a learning outcome be written as a graduate attribute?
Yeah. Oh, we're getting lots of people. I'll try and work. Oh, that's not how you do that.
That's an interesting one. It does can do instead of does know. Yes. Broader in scope, macro learning outcomes and micro.
Okay. So, I mean, we've sort of got that perception of the idea of it's a semantic difference. It's a discursive difference, and I think that does represent some of what the purpose of the competence-based approach is. It's not, I think we're probably in agreement, Andrew, that there isn't a huge difference between a learning outcome or a program competency as a type of learning outcome, and it's about shifting what we think of as learning outcomes in higher education and shifting what we think those outcomes are.
Yes. I noticed there's one slide there saying learning outcomes are more about micro level and program outcomes are more about macro level. And we do have program learning outcomes, but they are. I think one of the things for me that I've always noticed about learning outcomes is that they are written. Although they are meant to be written for students, they are written primarily for university approval processes, and often written in a language that isn't as student friendly as it needs to be. And students say, what does this actually mean? And I like this can do instead of does know. Action, the ability to do something, that's good. More knowledge base.
Yeah, so I suppose that articulation there is change this idea of changing the thinking of the teaching team, so that we're focusing on what students can do,
can actually do. Yes. Competence more related to an action, the ability of doing something with a certain level of experience. Not all program learning outcomes do this. That's a very true comment. I want to the third one in the bottom line of the second row. Competencies are about actions, the ability to do something with expertise, and certainly not all program learning outcomes do that. No.
Yeah. So just to say, Andrew and I will sort of go through and discuss and sort of look for themes. But if anyone has anything that they really, that they do want to contribute, please do raise a hand. And if somebody's written something they want to expand, or there's something in here. I'm not familiar with Miller's pyramid.
I'm not actually. No. Knows how shows does.
That's really interesting.
Knows how shows does. Miller's pyramid. Let's make a note of that.
Oh, this is nice. So competency is an applied, measurable, and quantifiable skill. So this is really interesting. I think this is probably one of the things that I would like to ask some of the people that we've had with this measurable and quantifiable skill. At what, particularly those of you guys who have shifted to a competence-based approach, at what level is the student competent? So is that at the third, at the 2-2, at the 2-1? When do we, if we're saying all the students are graduate and these are our program level outcomes, are they are the competencies students who leave are competent? Is that a level of competence that everybody on the program has achieved in order to pass, or is it an aspirational one?
It's a really interesting question, Dom. So I think my general feeling will be that somebody with a 2-1 is competent. but somebody with a third who has passed a competency-based program should also be regarded as being competent, but would we feel they are as competent? And I think it links this idea of DLA competence as being kind of threshold achievements, or do you look at them more holistically? One can be competent in a very specific niche area, but when you try to apply that in a different area, one may be less competent. And for the world of work for developing employability, we need them to be able to apply them.
I think that idea of being competent at different levels, I think one of the things that I think the competence-based education approach might start moving towards is really reducing the number of levels of grade that a student can achieve. So, at the moment we've got that very, very fine level difference, all from 0 to 100%. Ostensibly, whereas we don't actually use all of that often as markers, because 70% up to almost a third of that whole range is first, which is excellent. And so I think that something that the competence-based approach is quite helpful at is perhaps narrowing that down. And then I think also, instead of reducing students to a single grade-based percentage, I'd really like to see more complex sort of spider diagrams looking at, okay, well, here are the 12 competencies that the student was supposed to deliver. And a student might go through and they might really struggle with the sort of exam-based knowledge component of the course, but they might be really, really good at the data literacy component, or some level of collaboration, or digital literacy. And it would be really great to be able to see students graduating with these, as we say, these portfolios of competence, supported by these sort of spider diagrams that give a much more holistic sense of what the students can do. And I think that ties to some of the stuff that we've been talking about, helping students understand what they've learned, but also helping employers understand, where students, what students are capable of doing and what they've developed.
Yes, I really like this one in the bottom right. Learning outcomes position learners as passive recipients. Whereas PCs invite learners to take an active role as agents in the process. I think that's quite interesting, because it said learning. Normally, when we talk about learning, we're talking about pre-articulated or prescribed learning outcomes that are in advance of the program. With competencies, because they are broader and allow students to achieve in a range of different ways, I think I'd agree with that. Yes.
I suppose it sort of almost like beyond that idea of what students can do, because what the students are doing is the learning as well. If that makes sense. So like, it's not just the outcomes that have been actioned, it's the actual learning itself. I think it's a really nice articulation of that. Really, thank you for whoever put that up, and that's really, really interesting. I'm going to ask a question for people like this, because one of the things that we're going to discuss later is ethics as a competency, ethics as a literacy. Can we observe ethics as a literacy? If we have to be able to observe it in order for it to be a competency, how do we observe like really complex? So, for example, something like collaboration or ethics, things that we're not necessarily in the room for. How do we go about, observing that, or is it just something that we just say, well, actually, it's a thing that we hope we develop, but it's not a program competency because we can't observe it. Anna, if you'd like to come in.
Sure. I mean, I think you could, as you say, you might not be in the room for it, but I imagine if you set it up as like problem-based learning scenarios, potentially you could be in the room for it, and that's where you have to observe responses of a group of students to something. I mean, I guess, and in other ways, you could have students in a lab, treating animals or something like that. So I mean, I think it would be high staff time. You know, you'd have to have, I would say, well-trained, consistency of staff doing observations. But I would think you could, yeah, might be challenging.
Yeah, no, it's really nice. But I think then this is, for me, is a really sort of, when if we tie into that part of the next part of the question is, well, how does this tie into our assessment? That you know, that's potentially a very different assessment to what we might be using before, when we may well have assumed that students were developing their ethics, or you know, may well have assumed that students were developing their collaboration skills, but actually how well were we assessing that? How well were our assessments designed to observe and quantify and help students develop those things? Yeah. So a couple of other people picking up on the degree outcome.
Yeah, there's a nice chat going on in chat, Dom. I don't know if you're monitoring that.
Oh, I'm trying.
I'm looking at it.
Yeah, I was going to say, are you able to follow some of it? We might need to think about some sort of Padlets or something for the future of this, or maybe allow the conversation to go on asynchronously into the future. I suppose I'll pick up that point by that point about ungrading, which is something we've had a huge number of conversations about, and particularly the limitation of assessment by policy, and institutional and sector-based approaches to doing things, and how these are, you know, potentially barriers to some of the radical changes that we might need in order to pivot the sector to where it needs to be. I mean, does anybody think that that their institution, if we had this idea of competence-based education where students didn't leave with a grade, but a sort of much more, you know, a richer and more detailed portfolio of competence, does anyone think that, you know, that would be achievable within their institution? Or
That's a good question. Given the political will, it could be, I think. No.
would you like to elaborate, Carolyn? Is that going to be a no as well? What I'm going to do is, since we've had a fair number of responses.
Can I ask people who are there, does anybody work at an institution that has ungrading, that doesn't provide grades, say, in the first year at all?
Okay, Lucy's got a hand up. Lucy, do you want to turn your mic on?
Hi.
Hello.
We don't necessarily do it in first year, but there is a programme that we have called the Foundation Art and Design, which has no grades until you get to the final end point. And that allows for a lot more risk taking and a lot more creativity and exploration than the students perhaps have been used to in their prior education experience at A-level. So where they're very driven by grade. And actually, it's really transformational for the student to experience that ungraded environment, because it means that they are able to let down their barriers a little bit and not necessarily be completely focused on what do I have to do in order to get that good grade. They're far more focused on exploring their ideas and coming up with thinking outside the box. And we have different things like Failure Week, where we're really pushing that kind of idea of, if it doesn't work, that's equally as valuable as if something does work, because you learn so much more from it. So the ungraded element of that programme is really transformational. And I would say that is really crucial in the development of that course and that student.
That's interesting. That, thank you. And did it take a lot of work to get that embedded in the institution, or to get it agreed, or is it
No,
just something you just did?
it's standard. It's like it's a level 3 foundation that we deliver in higher education, but that's also delivered in FE. And UAL are the kind of main award providers of it. It's not an institutional program. It's like an awarding body program. But so it's been around for years and years, like 50 years or more, and that's the way it's always been. So it's pass fail. You just, to get through the next stage, you just pass it, and then you get to the next stage, you pass it, and then you get to the end, and then you're given a little bit more of an indication of a grade.
I think that's really helpful, having that reduced number of options for a grade as well, right? So that sort of, by scaling it down from 100, potentially infinite number of percentage points, that the difference between 65 and 65.5 is feasible within many of our marking criteria. Actually, just say, well, from a competence perspective, we can say, pass fail, or that competent, masterful, or all of that kind of stuff can really help with that process. Anna, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just going to say, what we've done is basically have an ungraded competency-based approach alongside the graded summative assessment. So, and actually the students have said, and this was sort of to avoid kind of the OSCE stress, the sort of such focus on doubt and the anxiety kind of that offshoots from that. So in our lab skills, and I'll talk about it this afternoon, we do the competency assessment and then just get peer acknowledgement rather than grading. So it's meant to be an iterative skills development thing rather than necessarily the graded format. So I think that's worked quite well in terms of still providing the benefits of assessment, summative assessment, but also ungraded components alongside it.
That's interesting. That do you feel, Anna, that the students are participating as much for the ungraded as they would for the graded? We know how much contemporary students are focused on grades and assessment. Do you feel they put in the same work for the ungraded elements?
Actually, I feel like they put in more. It's increased their lab attendance quite significantly.
Wow.
And now we're adding it into things like staffs that have had issues with engagement, because it's become a thing. They want their stamp, and they want to be told they're doing it right. So actually, it's really improved motivation quite well.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. Thank you. Anybody else got any hands up? Let's just have a look. Here. Just looking at some more of these. Expected skill and knowledge of completion. Conversation applied, measurable, quantified skill. Is there anybody who feels that there is a radical difference between competencies and learning outcomes at all? So I'm not picking that up from any of these. People feel that there's any kind of big difference. So if we were to say then that there isn't a enormous difference for institutions that don't use competency-based education, what kind of barriers would there be for them to move from learning outcomes to competence-based education? Would there be more barriers than we perceive them to be, or should it be something that should, in theory, be relatively unproblematical?
I was going to say, can I ask Chris the yes with an if? Is that yes with an if it's done properly?
Yes, if it's done properly.
Is that, or is it yes if? Because I suppose one of the things that's really interesting here is that some programs, like at Hull, came from a competence-based approach as sort of provided by their PSLB to the whole sort of a competence-based approach, and those things were quite different.
Yes, they were.
I think the staff buy-in is a really important part of this, and I mean, I think one of the barriers is, I mean, I do wonder if many programs and many sort of curriculums are about recreating the aspects of university that the lecturers enjoyed when they were students, and I think it's really challenging to reflect on how well that that sort of approach to curriculum actually does what students need it to do now, potentially multiple decades later.
That's a good point. That, yes, it is. It is.
But I think it's, I suppose, it's not just buy-in, but it's the competence to do it. I think one of the things that I really enjoyed hearing from Sarah and Chris and Ruth and Jackie is the recognition that actually maybe the program team isn't necessarily in the best place to do all of this on their own. For many programs, we're preparing students for futures that we've not experienced ourselves. So we need to rely on other people to bring that expertise in and to provide that support in terms of, well, actually, what are the competencies that students need to have? What are the ways of learning that we need to put in place into the curriculum in order to do it? And I think that's really challenging.
Yes, it is.
And is particularly when you're in a job where you've been brought there because you're the expert on what you do, and I think it's quite difficult to relinquish that.
To relinquish some of that power to the students. Yes.
Go on, Carolyn. Well, I don't know if you're not muted, but I don't know if your sound's working.
Yeah, there's definitely no audio from you, Caroline. Don't know if you want to try clicking on the three dots where it says more and just have a look at your audio settings. Otherwise, type it in the chat.
Yes.
Yeah. I agree with that. The concern about that tick box exercise aspect as well.
Yeah.
But I think I do think that's something that the lecturers do bring in the passion. It's not a question of it's not a question of not being bothered or whatever. I think it's a question of actually, well, how do we create an environment where people feel empowered to do these things? I suppose if I pick on Nigel's one, what aspect of the marketplace they will face should we be
in their futures?
Should we be preparing them for? Sorry, Carolyn, if you're able to put maybe put it in via the chat. Sorry.
Yeah, that comment from Nigel was mentioned. We should be preparing students for the graduate marketplace they will face, not the one we would like them to have. Any more hands gone up? No.
I know, maybe it's time for another controversial question.
Go on.
Another controversial question. Go on then.
You got one?
No, I haven't got one.
Oh,
suggesting you might have.
I thought you were going to come up with a good controversial question then.
Well, we're going into lunch I think we're going into lunch in 5 minutes. But I think that, yeah, I think fundamentally that I think that point is that Carolyn is that, and you know, with Anna, it's not a tick box. It's not
No.
it's not a suggestion that one size fits all. I think one of the things that would be really powerful for the sector is to recognise that institutions are different, our students are different. You know, what they hope to achieve and the expertise and the places that we're in all tie into what we can do well. And I think different students need different learning environments. And I think that's one of my biggest concerns with the sector at the moment, is that it sort of feels like it's all very similar. You know, students who go around and doing open days. A lot of universities are all doing the same selling points. A lot of courses are all talking about the same things, and it all sort of seems to have converged on a single model of this is what good is.
University is.
This is what good is, and I think it would be by spending more time talking to our students and external stakeholders and the regions that we're in would really help us provide that diversity of curriculum. Yeah. Some helpful things in here as well.
That's an interesting one from Chris there. Yes, yeah.
Okay. Well, I think in which case we'll stop on time for lunch. I think it's probably the best plan.
So we'll reconvene.
We'll come back in for talks about marking criteria
1:15
and reflection, which should sort of carry on some of the conversations that we've had. But thank you very much, everybody.
Yes, thanks, people. Have a break.